Have you ever wondered if there's a better way to grow our food? A smarter, more natural way to protect our crops that actually works with nature instead of fighting against it? Well, we're going to dive into a brilliant strategy that does exactly that. It's pretty amazing.
I mean, seriously, think about it. If you're a farmer, this isn't just a question, it's your daily reality. You're in a constant battle against this, well, army of insects that can literally wipe out everything you've worked for. So what do you do? For a long time, the main strategy has been all-out chemical war. Just blanket the fields with pesticides and hope for the best. But there's a much more elegant approach bubbling up called agroecological engineering. Think of it less like war and more like a really sophisticated kind of diplomacy with the local ecosystem. And maybe the best example of this kind of diplomacy in action is a method called push-pull technology. It's not just about getting rid of a pest, it's about engineering a whole ecosystem to be healthier and more resilient on its own. So, what is it exactly? At its heart, push-pull is this incredibly clever companion planting strategy. It doesn't rely on killing the pests. Instead, it uses the natural sense that different plants give off to kind of guide their behavior. It gently tells them where to go and, maybe more importantly, where not to go. The whole thing really boils down to three simple actions that work together perfectly. You've got the push, which shoos the pests away from your main crop. Then you have the pull, which lures them over to something else. And finally, you have the trap, which makes sure they don't cause any more trouble. Let's see how this works for a crop like maize. All right, so let's start with part one of this system. What in the world is doing all the pushing? The push actually comes from a plant, specifically a legume called Desmodium. You plant it right there between the rows of maize. Now, Desmodium lets out these natural chemicals that stem borer moths just can't stand. It's basically a giant go-away sign for the pests, pushing them off the really valuable maize. Okay, that makes sense. We're pushing the pests away from the good stuff. But where do they go? That's where the pull part of the strategy comes in. So, around the entire border of the field, farmers plant something totally different, usually Napier grass. This grass gives off a scent that the moths find absolutely irresistible, way more attractive than the maize. So it effectively pulls all those pests that were pushed away over to the edge of the field. It acts like the perfect decoy. But here's the genius part. It's not just a distraction, it's actually a trap. When the moths land on the Napier grass and lay their eggs, the plant produces this gummy, sticky substance. It traps the little larvae as soon as they hatch, which means they can't survive and they can't reproduce. Problem solved. So you'd think, okay, the insect problem is handled. Awesome, right? But the true genius of this whole system is that it's also fighting another battle against a hidden enemy that's lurking right under the soil. And that enemy is a parasitic plant called striga, but most people know it by its much cooler name, witchweed. And let me tell you, it is a huge threat to crops all across Africa. Witchweed is just nasty stuff. Its seeds can lie dormant in the soil for years just waiting. As soon as a crop like maize starts to grow, the seeds germinate, latch onto the roots, and just suck the life right out of the plant. A lot of times, the farmer has no idea it's even happening until it's way too late. Now, this is where the system gets even smarter. Remember our push plant Desmodium? Well, its roots release this unique chemical compound into the soil, and this chemical does two things. First, it tricks the sleeping striga seeds into germinating. But then, and this is the kicker, it also stops them from being able to attach to the maize roots. So the weed sprouts, has nothing to feed on, and just dies. They call it suicidal germination. How cool is that? It literally cleans the field of this parasite over time. You see, the really crucial thing to get here is that this system isn't just about controlling one or two specific pests. Push-pull is actively rebuilding the health and the complexity of the entire farm ecosystem. Just look at all these extra benefits. The Desmodium acts as a permanent ground cover, which creates a safe home for predators that eat pests, like spiders and beetles. The variety of plants attracts good guys, like parasitic wasps, who also help control the pest population. And remember how Desmodium is a legume? That means it naturally pulls nitrogen out of the air and puts it into the soil, which makes the soil more fertile year after year. That means farmers need way less synthetic fertilizer. And that's really the fundamental difference. When you just spray pesticides everywhere, you create what's called a biological vacuum. It's an empty, fragile environment. But an approach like this builds a complex and resilient trophic web, a food web. You're creating a system that can start to regulate itself and actually get stronger over time. So, when you put these two different approaches right next to each other, the choice becomes pretty obvious. On one hand, you've got industrial spraying. The focus is just on killing everything. It tanks your biodiversity and it creates this fragile system where you're totally dependent on buying more chemicals, which costs a lot of money year after year. On the other hand, you have agroecological engineering, like push-pull. The focus is on management. It actually increases biodiversity, which in turn builds a robust, self-regulating system. Sure, it takes some knowledge to set up, but the payoff is real, long-term stability. And really, what this all represents is a huge shift in our thinking. It's about moving away from this idea of finding one magic bullet, one chemical for one pest, and instead moving towards this intelligent, multifunctional management of the entire farm. It's a system that doesn't just grow food, it grows a healthier world.